Now, alternative energy sources has come into the spotlight once again after electricity supplier Eskom last week resorted to load shedding rather. Eskom said a wet supply of coal caused them to put the country on a load shedding schedule, with rainy weather still being a risk for more wet coal and the winter months around the corner. Electricity supply might be strained again, or will be strained again. In our studio today, we are joined by Professor Raymond Parsons from the Potchefstroom Business School and a special policy advisor to the Business Unity of South Africa. You've been looking at alternatives to save the country from these kinds of marginal situations, I understand, like we had last week. What do you think can help the electricity supplier in what seems like a bit of a fix?
Well, I think the point of departure for us must be that we're in a situation now where trying to keep the lights on is too important to be left only to an organization like Eskom, as important as it is. So clearly, we need to have a collaborative effort, look at other alternatives. For many South Africans, it's like watching a bad old movie from January 2008. And it's not a good message to send out. We should have learned a lot more about how to deal with the situation, bearing in mind that our economy was booming then. So one could almost understand the problem even if one didn't accept it. Now we're struggling to grow at 2 or 3% and we're having this problem. So clearly we've got to now rigorously and seriously look at lessening our dependence on Eskom by levelling the playing field for the independent producers. That legislation is still in Parliament. There's the cogeneration opportunities. That is those companies and businesses that have their own electricity but can sell it into the grid. That's another option that we can look at. Of course, we must all try to save electricity as much as we can because that's part of the solution. And then, of course, another point may be bearing in mind that there seems to be a 2 or 3 year gap between now, this is the critical situation, and when other capacity will kick in over 2 or 3 years. Another option which we could investigate could, of course, be the question of daylight saving. And I think many South Africans should ask themselves, would they rather go through last Thursday again, or just get up 1 hour earlier, or stay up 1 hour later? I understand we had it in the Second World War to save coal and for the war effort. We have it in Namibia, so perhaps we should investigate that as another option. But quite clearly, to bridge the gap between now and 2 or 3 years' time, we need to be able to say we're going to develop the other alternatives much more enthusiastically than we've been able to do up until now. Why is there seemingly, and this is probably a perception from just scanning around the media myself, we don't have a real appetite to invest in alternative energy sources as we should have? Well, you do need a policy framework, and I think we've not been speeding up the framework or the environment within which the independent producers can really pull their weight, step up to the plate. Also the cogeneration. And the issue also is that now one feels that Eskom has outgrown its monopoly. It needs more competition. And that's what this represents. We need to encourage that competition. I mean, just to be serious for a moment, but also lighthearted, what other company goes on television every night and says, please buy less of my product? And if you were to use a business analogy, if you had a car manufacturer who got up and said, please buy less of my cars, I'm going to charge you more for it. If you buy more of it, I'm going to penalize you. And if you do get a car, please don't drive it too much. They would be out of business in a week. So we have to look at the competitive environment. Yes, of course, Eskom will still be a major player, but we've now got to move on structurally and have a more competitive market which will encourage these alternatives, incentivize them so that we can spread our risks better on the energy front and that we're less dependent on a monopoly that quite clearly can no longer manage the total situation. Finally, where's the money going to come from? Well, I think the big issue here, we mustn't see it as just a money problem. There's a management problem. That's the message we've got to send out of, indeed, confidence that as a nation, with government, Eskom and business and the consumer, that we are going to tackle these problems by manage them both top down and indeed bottom up. in a more effective way. Don't see everything as a money problem, that if you throw enough money at a problem, it will be solved. That is not entirely the case here. It's got to be a management problem, and we've got to structure our electricity market in such a way that we concentrate the minds of those who have to manage it better than they have managed it up until now.
Just quickly, do you expect a very cold, dark winter?
Well, a lot depends on the outcome of certain discussions which are now taking place. It's going to be a very tight situation. I think we must understand that it will call for the cooperation of everyone to get through this winter and keep the lights on.